Hi everyone, I'm Maddie Honia. Today I'll be discussing the redundancy principle, a multimedia concept that explains how people process information more effectively. In this presentation, I'll explain what the redundancy principle is, why it occurs, review research supporting it, and discuss practical ways to apply it when designing educational content. Let's start with Principle 1. When learners view a graphic while listening to narration, they process information through both visual and auditory channels. Therefore, when graphics are already being explained through audio narration, we should avoid displaying the same words as on-screen text. Adding the exact same words as on-screen text forces learners to divide their attention between reading and listening, which can create unnecessary cognitive load. Although redundant text can sometimes hinder learning, there are situations where it can be helpful. For example, on-screen text may support learners who are non-native speakers, reinforce unfamiliar technical terms, or provide guidance when no graphics are present. In these cases, carefully selected text can improve comprehension and retention by helping learners focus on important information. The redundancy principle is based on how our brains process information. We have separate visual and auditory channels, but both of them have limited capacity. So when we see a graphic and a lot of on-screen text at the same time, our visual system can get overloaded pretty quickly. We're trying to read and look at the same image at the same time, which makes it harder to really understand what's going on. Redundancy can also create something called split attention. This happens when learners have to go back and forth between reading text, looking at visuals, and listening to narration. That takes extra mental effort, and it doesn't actually help learning. Instead of focusing on understanding the main idea, the learner is using their brain power just trying to manage all the duplicate information, which can lower comprehension. This slide demonstrates a design that follows the redundancy principle. The learner sees a graphic of the water cycle while listening to a narration that explains the process. Notice that in this example, there is very little text on the screen besides labels that identify key parts of the diagram. In this example, the graphic provides the visual information and the narration provides the verbal explanation. Because the same information is not repeated as large blocks of on-screen text, cognitive overload is reduced and learners can focus on building a mental model of the water cycle. This slide represents a violation of the redundancy principle. The learner sees the water cycle graphic, hears the narration in process, and simultaneously reads a detailed text description that repeats the same information. While it may seem helpful to provide information in multiple formats, presenting identical information through narration and on-screen text can actually hinder learning. A better design would remove the large text block and allow the graphic and narration to work together. This would create a more efficient learning experience and align with evidence-based multimedia principles. Together, these examples show how instructional designers can improve learning by carefully selecting which information is presented visually and which information is presented verbally. Eliminating unnecessary redundancy helps learners focus on the essential content and promotes deeper understanding. Like any rule, there are always exceptions. There are a few situations in which it's okay to use redundant on-screen text in a multimedia presentation. If there is no graphic at all, then it's acceptable to use some redundant text on screen to allow the learner to receive information through both visual and auditory channels. Another situation where it would be acceptable is if the text and graphics are presented sequentially, one after the other, or when the pacing of the presentation is slow enough that the learner has time to take in all of the information, both visually and in auditory form. If there is only a short summary presented on the screen or a few keywords, it could help the learner understand a graphic more effectively. Note that in this case, you would not be reading the text on screen verbatim during the narration, but rather provide key notes to help direct attention to key principles. And finally, if it would cause the learner to exert a lot of effort to take in the narrated text rather than printed text, it might actually support learning to have redundant text on the screen. Exceptions to the redundancy principle must only be used if they do not add to the learner's processing demands. For example, if an instructor provided a lecture in an audio-only podcast, the learner would only be receiving information through their auditory channel. Therefore, it would be okay to place redundant text on screen to reinforce the verbal narration, since the written text would enter through the learner's visual channel. If a learner was listening to a voice-only lecture and the instructor read the definition of communication, which was also on screen, it would not create additional processing demands on the learner, since the verbal definition is entering through the auditory channel and the written definition is entering through the learner's visual channel. Exceptions to the redundancy principle may actually enhance learning in certain situations. For example, when learning a foreign language or even a very technical subject with unfamiliar words, it may help to reinforce the verbal delivery of text with written text on the screen. Additionally, if a presentation is self-paced or presented very slowly, it might help the learner to go back over written text or verbal text multiple times to enhance learning without causing cognitive overload, since they have time to focus on each channel individually. Finally, printing a few words next to corresponding parts of a graphic, especially complicated graphics, can enhance learning by signaling to the learner the most important parts that are crucial to their learning. Evidence supports the guidelines we already modeled earlier. If a visual is doing important work and the narration is explaining it, duplicate text is not often helping it. It's competing for the same visual processing resources. The exception is selective text. If the text is short, learner-paced, needed for technical or unfamiliar terms, or placed as a brief label near the relevant part of a graphic, it can guide attention instead of overloading it. These 3 questions are designed to help learners engage with the redundancy principle at different levels. Question 1 checks understanding of the core concept by asking learners why redundant text can interfere with learning. Question 2 encourages learners to identify exceptions to the principle and recognize situations where on-screen text may be helpful. And question 3 asks learners to apply the principle to a realistic instructional design scenario, helping them connect the theory with practical decision-making in e-learning design. Thank you for viewing this presentation on the redundancy principle. The references cited throughout this are listed on this slide.